2025, ladies and gentlemen, hasn't been a happy new year for Americans. In fact, the new year has gotten off to a rather tragic and concerning start, with multiple attacks rocking United States of America one after the other. It began with ISIS-linked Shamsuddin Jabbar ramming a truck into crowds of people at 3:15 a.m. local time, gathered to ring in 2025 at Bourbon Street in New Orleans. 15 people have been killed in this incident and more than 30 have been injured, including 2 police officers. Cut to Las Vegas, where an explosive-laden Tesla Cybertruck exploded outside the Trump Towers. The accused in this case is believed to be 37-year-old Matthew Livelsberger. The third attack was a mass shooting which happened at the Amazura nightclub at Queens, with 11 people being shot at.
A good friend of mine actually passed away from getting hit by it. The guy, I didn't know it was a terrorist, but the guy ends up getting out and shooting people. Like, he had ARs and bombs and all that, man. But the aftermath was really what got me. Like, bodies all up and down the street. Everybody screaming and hollering. You look down, you see somebody doing CPR. You look around, people crying on the floor. Like, brains matter all over the ground.
Looked outside our front door and we saw caution tape and dead silence, and it's eerie. We bought a place down here because of the environment and the way people live, and to look out our front door and see caution tape and dead silence, like, this is not what we fell in love with. It's sad.
Approximately 90 people were inside the location in an upstairs private event space. The venue was at capacity and a queue of about 15 people formed outside awaiting as other attendees exited. 4 males were walking eastbound on 91st Avenue onto 144th Place towards the venue. 3 to 4 males then opened fire over 30 times in the direction of the group standing outside the event space, striking multiple victims. This is not a terrorist attack.
Meanwhile, the outgoing and incoming presidents of U.S. reacted to the New Orleans attack. Joe Biden said there is no justification for violence of any kind, and that Shamsud posted an ISIS-inspired video before attempting complete carnage.
The FBI has reported to me the killer was an American citizen, born in Texas. He served in the United States Army on active duty for many years. He also served in the Army Reserve until a few years ago. The FBI also reported to me that mere hours before the attack, he posted videos on social media indicating that he was inspired by ISIS, expressing a desire to kill.
Now, Donald Trump once again spoke on outsiders. On his social media account, Trump stated that the criminals coming in are far worse than the criminals inside U.S. Now, investigators probing the Tesla explosion said no larger group was involved in it.
We believe this is an isolated incident. We do not believe that there's a bunch of folks out there supporting this or helping this, and we don't believe that there's any other danger to the community right now. But again, over the next few hours and days, we will continue to do our best to research that as much as we can and get to the bottom of this, and we won't stop until we're 100% certain as to what happened and why.
While the accused of the Queens attack remains at large, the other 2 are dead. The New Orleans and Tesla Cybertruck attacks, ladies and gentlemen, might have been carried out at 2 different locations, but there's one striking similarity between the 2 accused. Both Shamsud Jabbar and Matthew Livelsberger were U.S. Army veterans, and that is a huge concern for the FBI, which is probing these incidents. And the fact that these attacks come just days ahead of Donald Trump's inauguration on the 20th of January makes it all the more of a concern in America. Let's get a perspective on this, and then let's try and understand what has been happening in the United States of America. On Global Mirror, I'm joined by Glenn Carle. He's a career CIA officer and former National Intelligence Officer. I'm also joined by Dr. Mark Merowitz, political analyst and professor, State University of New York Maritime College. Vibhuti Jha, former Republican candidate for New York Assembly, joins us, and Dr. Michael Owens, Mayor Mableton and President, U.S. Global Center for Cyber Policy, also joins us. Good evening and namaskar to all of you. Glenn Carle, let me begin with you. there is a lot of speculation about whether these attacks are coordinated or just a coincidence. Mass shootings are unfortunately commonplace in America, but what about the attack that had, Jabbar ramming a truck into lots of people who were gathered to ring in 2025, and of course the Tesla Cybertruck explosion? Do you see this as two linked incidents?
Well, we don't know the facts, of course, yet, and we may not for some time as the FBI, CIA, and others begin their investigations. But I think the likelihood is that they are not coordinated. The general phenomenon, and in all generalities, you will have exceptions, of course, of terrorism in recent years, and in fact for 25 years, but especially in the last decade, has been that ISIS, the most threatening, coherent group, has largely been so disrupted, if not completely destroyed, that it's not able to project coherent planned attacks like this. However, what has occurred worldwide is what sometimes are referred to as lone wolf or inspired, motivated individuals who identify with the grievances that are expressed by radical Islam and ISIS in particular, and then decide to act for that ideal. And they come to their beliefs through social media and all of the media that all of us have access to. That appears to be the case here, but we don't know. That does generally characterize the terrorist attacks globally committed by, quote, radical Islamists.
Yeah. Dr. Mark Merowitz, therefore, the kind of attacks that we've seen, this, lone wolf, suspected lone wolf ISIS agent attack that we are seeing, and as Glenn Carle was saying, that these are attempts to, send out a message, try and sort of implement what the person has in his or her mind. Do you also connect this with the upcoming inauguration of Donald Trump? Do you see any link of that, trying to send out a message ahead of that?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for including me, but I will take some disagreement with my distinguished colleague, Mr. Carle. First of all, is it a coincidence that both attackers used the same website, Turo, to rent the vehicles that they used in the attacks? Does one have to be a nuclear scientist to understand that? Furthermore, as far as what we're looking at right here, we have a very, I don't know, lone wolf, the FBI agent who got up and said within 5 minutes that it was not a terrorist attack, is one of the extraordinary failures of communication in American history. Why say that right away? How do we know it's a lone wolf? In terms of the connections, whether it's directly connected or not, it's clear that it is part of some sort of an active terrorist attack. And in fact, the attackers, the FBI believes now certainly in New Orleans, there was more than one person. What we're seeing is an international event of momentous significance. And everything, as they say in politics, is connected. In terms of the inauguration, yes, it is not a coincidence that the attacker in Vegas attacked the Trump Hotel with a Tesla vehicle, which is a Musk product, after Biden is leaving now and Trump is coming in. There is no coincidence in these events. Did some one mastermind think of it? Well, somebody thought of that. And furthermore, lastly, I would say, they were very clever because the New Orleans authorities took away the barriers to protect Bourbon Street in November and left a few little barriers, orange barriers there. And this attacker knew to go around the police car and to go past this useless police car, which was there, and attack these poor people. Where in the world were our authorities, where our leaders, the FBI, Homeland Security? And again, he was posting on social media, the New Orleans attacker, about what he was thinking about and what he was going to do. So where is our our government, Biden, FBI, Homeland Security. Now they're trying to figure it out. Really? I mean, it's a little too late. They better figure out what to do right now to prevent that. Lastly, I'm sorry to go on, the Sugar Bowl. Letting the Sugar Bowl go on, yes, I understand that we want to live a normal life in terrorism. But before we figure this one out, we're going to put people, thousands of people, in a big Superdome and have a big ball game. Is it so important to have sports on the day after New Year's, after these poor people were killed, that they must do it? I have to say, as a college professor, I'm also a lawyer, I give our leaders a grade of F, failure to protect the American people. And I'm hoping they're going to start doing that right away. I'm sorry to be pessimistic, but I must be realistic that our institutions have failed us, failed us, failed us. That's what I feel. I'm very, very upset about
let me take
these
this
events.
across to Glenn Carle, Dr. Merowitz. Yes, Glenn Carle, do you want to comment on this? There are indeed questions being raised on the FBI. You had the New Orleans police say, this was an act of terror. Then you had the FBI contradicting that very statement in its initial probe, saying that it's not a terrorism act. Then they came out with a final statement where they said that they're probing this as an act of terrorism. Clearly, raising a lot of questions on the investigative agencies there.
Yes, our colleague makes some points I agree with, not all, but some. I think the coincidence of the truck rental venue is certainly of note and needs to be pursued. That's true, and I don't think it should surprise anyone, although it should be noted by the authorities definitely that these events have involved, as our colleague pointed out, a Tesla product, a Trump hotel, the date shortly prior to the inauguration. All those things are significant or potentially significant. At least they're noteworthy. It's too early, however, to say that we know that there's a coherent web and a mastermind behind this. There may be. More typically, what these attacks are these inspired, and I use the word guardedly, individuals who think that they're striking a blow against injustice and racism and all of their frankly cockamamie series of logical reasonings. That it isn't Islamically inspired, radically so. That seems quite clear, I think, at least with the New Orleans attack. Beyond that, I think it's a bit harsh to instantaneously condemn the authorities. Certainly, they should be considering the advantages and dangers of holding a mass event right away. However, the last thing I'll note for the moment is all of us, whether we're officials or observers, as we are all talking right now, have an instinctive reflex after a catastrophe. Once the crocodile grabs the water buffalo in the water hole, all of us run away from the edge of the water because we think it's we might be eaten too. When in fact the danger is not necessarily, and statistically tends not to be, greater after the event than before. But an authority's job is to look at the risks and to weigh this. And at present, we certainly do not know, and it's too early to reach a conclusion on that point.
I absolutely understand, Glenn Carle, what you're saying, but I think a lot of Americans also feel that the authorities had the job of also alerting them that the crocodile is there in the water and that you need to be careful before going closer. Basically, keeping a tab on the kind of risk that might be involved with this particular person and tracking him or her. But let me get in the two political representatives on this discussion on the show. And before I get to the mass shooting and the never-ending gun control law debate in the US, Vibhuti Jha, how concerned are you as an American, as a Republican, that all these attacks come ahead of the Trump inauguration, particularly the Tesla Cybertruck exploding, clearly trying to send out a message?
Thank you, Shreya, for having me, and delighted to be with such illustrious group of people here. As an American, I know one thing for sure. You can't take a decision based on what you don't know. And my favorite phrase is, we have to act knowing what we know. That's important. So Glenn is right, Mark is right, is the fact that we can't come to conclusion yet. But what is the bleeding obvious is the ideological trend in the processes that are happening here. This is not the first attack. And the rate at which things are going, this won't be the last either. And many army headquarters and many army places have been attacked by people who have been in the armed forces, and it was termed as workplace violence. So what is the important part here is for us to actually discuss with saner minds that are we sacrificing public safety for political correctness? That's the issue that we need to talk about. Today, the way I know some of the things is that we are almost prohibited from calling out the truth the way it is. Why are we blind to the fact that it is the ideological bent of mind, is the ideological thread that lets them do what they do, and they are systematically abusing and taking advantage of freedom as the fault line of democracy. I've said this many times, and I'll say it again. Freedom has become the fault line of democracy, and the criminals and thugs are taking full advantage of that because they know they are not guilty until proven so. And we all know, all the four people here know that how difficult it is to prove things because you have to connect so many dots. The other part, which is very important to understand, the ideological bent, is the 3 V's that I have often talked about: vote bank, violence on the street, and victimhood. That's the modus operandi. So what are we going to do to prevent these disruption of the American way of life, of celebration, of events, social and cultural events? Now people would be afraid to go. There will be many people who will drop out of Trump inaugural event, and I was going to go, and I will probably go. But the point of the matter here is that everybody will be looking over their shoulder, not knowing what's coming from which quarter. And to that end, the law and order and the civil society of America has to become more alert.
Yeah. Let me take this across to Dr. Michael Owens. Dr. Owens, one of his first reactions after the New Orleans attack came to the fore and was being reported is how Donald Trump reacted. And he said that I've always been saying this, that people who've come from outside are bigger criminals than the ones we have in the United States of America. And he's largely blamed it on the Democratic Party for the kind of situation that America is witnessing right now.
First of all, thank you for having me on and Happy New Year. But I have to say that makes very little sense, considering that, unfortunately, a lot of these attacks are committed by Americans on American soil that may have been radicalized elsewhere. We do know that some members have been in the military and had some exposure. But I'll have to, reiterate the fact that just because there is events that seem to be connected in some way, we cannot take the approach that there's some mastermind behind the scenes pulling the strings and coordinating this master attack against the U.S. The idea of politicizing this period and somehow making this seem like it was the fault of the Democrats. I reached out to Mayor Cantrell, who is a colleague of mine, the mayor of New Orleans, and obviously she was distraught, but she was fierce in her resolve in order to not only resolve this issue and figure out who was behind it, but also working with Republicans and working with everyone to come together with members of the local government, the state government, and the federal government to really get behind this and find out exactly what happened. So it is disappointing to me, but it's not surprising to hear that our former and soon-to-be next president, and Donald Trump, has said these type of remarks. I want to say too, living here in Georgia, the attack was a lot of people from Georgia that was there. As a matter of fact, a student from if I'm not mistaken, a student from the University of Georgia was actually injured in that attack because University of Georgia is actually going to be playing in that game tonight. I do believe it was right to postpone it. And but I also can tell you this: the people of New Orleans are used to handling large events, national, international events. And I do believe that they are absolutely prepared for this. I don't believe that there's a concern of having the Sugar Bowl game played. The attack happened, and there were measures put in place. But as the chief of police in New Orleans said, they admitted the fact that they could have done better. but they've stepped up defense and they will move forward with the game. I will say one more thing, that as a mayor here in Georgia, the Six Flags is in my Six Flags Over Georgia's amusement park that's in my city. And we had some events that happened where someone was shot outside of the amusement park. And immediately I got together with our state and local law enforcement and officials, and we're able to determine not only what happened, but how we can make things safer. I dare to say events like this, questions are resolved, but it also gives an opportunity to make events and opportunities safer for all Americans. So again, it's unfortunate it happened. That was a loss of life, but I do believe that we will be stronger for this.
Sure. Dr. Owens, it's interesting that you say that America is able to handle bigger national and international events. And let me take this across to Dr. Mark Merowitz. Dr. Mark, I want to shift our focus to what happened at Queens outside the Amazura nightclub, once again raising the question of gun control. Dr. Owens says that America is able to handle bigger events without any security challenge. But the fact of the matter is that as we speak, I'm sure every American in their mind is mentally prepared that if such a situation occurs, what they should do. And they've been telling family members that if a mass shooting happens at a supermarket, at a school, at a college, what should we do? Clearly, neither the Republicans nor the Democrats are doing anything about it. During the campaign, you had both sides talk about how they're not going to be scrapping possession of guns, and they said that the Second Amendment stays.
I'm sorry to deflect this discussion. To me, that's an apple and an orange, not related to this issue. Perhaps another day we can do that. Right now, I think
yes,
what
it's
we
not,
haven't spoken
but it is
about,
one of the issues that has come to the fore.
I understand. But the big issue is the international implications of this issue. The Wall Street Journal today focuses on the fact and the connection to the withdrawal from Afghanistan and the fact that Syria has a huge ISIS presence, just like, remember, Afghanistan did, and the United States and Trump is contemplating removing troops from there. And the problem you have is the possibility of Syria becoming another ISIS terror state. And while the issues about the Second Amendment are very, very important for Americans and are certainly issues for the day, today we need to be protected from ISIS. My other point would be, I don't think Americans are understanding the rise of terrorism around the world. Magdeburg in Germany, I think you may have mentioned, there was a car ramming there. These are all connected in some respect.
Yes.
But they're a wake-up call to Americans. The problem here, you have two military veterans possibly involved in this. It's not the right that they have the possession of weapons and removing weapons from the streets. It's eradicating the root causes of the terrorism, which is ISIS. And also the problem that many Americans, I don't think, understand clearly the implications. You have protesters in the world walking around in streets, and that's another story, but I'm pro-Palestine, holding Hamas flags, holding ISIS flags, walking in the middle of Manhattan.
So there is, of course, Dr. Mark, clearly a sentiment against the ISIS, against illegal immigration as well. But as I said, this, of course, as you said, is extremely crucial and extremely important that we see that U.S. Army veterans have been involved in these two attacks, and that is for the FBI and CIA and the Biden administration to really probe as to what exactly went wrong where. But let me take this across to Vibhuti Jha and Dr. Michael Owens, and 30 seconds each, please. I have paucity of time. This is regarding the gun control laws that I had asked about. Which of your parties is doing what on this? Nobody is doing anything.
I'm not going to deflect from the conversation, although I can agree. I don't know that how central it is to this happening right now. But I do think it's imperative that we have this discussion, continue to have this discussion about the Second Amendment and gun rights. He was carrying the gentleman who did run into in Bourbon Street that killed 10 people, did have a weapon on him and unleashed that. So I don't think we continue to kick this can down the road, but I also want to ensure that we're not creating some mass hysteria of fear that ISIS is knocking on our door and coming to kill everyone that's here. this was an American. It happened on American soil, and he did have access to a weapon. We can talk about ensuring that we have better gun laws in place. We make it safer for certain people not to have guns. But at the same time, we have to ensure that we're coming together, Democrats and Republicans, to address this head on, and deferring this or saying it's not important is not a way to a solution.
Okay. Vibhuti Jha, last word. Will Trump 2.0 have tighter gun control laws?
I think Trump 2.0 will probably stick to the Second Amendment rights, and it's a fundamental right. I agree with Mark that this is a conversation to be had on another day. This particular thing is very important for all of us to begin to understand that demanding reciprocity is key to some kind of a civil life. You cannot afford to allow the unknowns determine our decision. We have to take our decisions on facts that we know, what we know. Political, softening of the stand is not enough now. It is actually the time for enough is enough. Thank you.
All right, we'll leave it there. Thank you very much to all of you gentlemen, Glenn Carle, Vibhuti Jha, Dr. Michael Owens, and Dr. Mark Meyerowitz. Thank you very much to all of you for joining us on Global Mirror and sharing your perspective. With that, viewers, it's a wrap on Global Mirror. News and updates will continue on Mirror Now. Up next is Sneha Koshi with Beyond the Headlines.